Well, good morning, Sabbath School. Nice to see you here today. It's been a long time since I've had to be up front here, and I'm thankful to be able to be here today. Thankful for those who have filled in a couple times for me. We're going to have a song service to begin with and start with 431, I Would Be Like Jesus. And we'll sing the first, second, and fourth verses, I Would Be Like Jesus. Our next song is number 119. They'll know we are Christians by our love. When we're like Jesus, we're loving. 119. And we'll sing the first three verses of this one. Our last song this morning will be number 138, Blessed Be the Tie That Binds. We'll sing the first 3 verses of that. Blessed be the tie that binds, number 138. Within our homes, within our church, our communities, our work environment, we always hope that those are the things that pull us together, our Christian love. I just wanted to share a few words before our Sabbath school lesson this morning, and those of you who know me usually know I try to pick something from my life, and you also know that I'm sort of an independent person. I got my wings clipped a few months ago following a ladder accident and a bad ankle fracture. For my independent go-getter spirit and personality, this was definitely a slowdown and impediment. A couple of weeks ago, I got my permission to go full weight bearing and quit using crutches. I was ecstatic. I went home, put my crutches in the trunk, and took the dog for a walk. Or I should say, for a hobble. It started out well, but I discovered that where there was previously no pain, suddenly there was big time pain. And where there was this, I can do this attitude, there was now, for the moment, I don't know about this. Not going very well. I had to go back to crutches and no weight bearing, and I needed assistance. I was very disappointed. Isn't our spiritual journey often a bit like this? Great progress, then a setback. Going it alone, then realizing our need for help. Israel was certainly like this. In my Bible readings over the past few months, I've read over and over about this kind of pattern. In the wilderness, God gave instructions and guidelines through Moses, and the Israelites promised, everything you said, we'll do. And how long was it before they were building a golden calf or otherwise wandering off, doing their own thing, having a major spiritual setback? Not long. And most of us know sometimes it takes only days, maybe hours, or even minutes for that setback. What does one do when they fall, fail, or experience such a setback? For me, I kind of had to go back to square one and start over. Pick up the crutches, get off the ankle. Spiritually, it's the same. We must go back, return to our spiritual roots. And God's response is always the same. Return to me, and I will return to you. He says that in Malachi 3:7. He says it in a whole bunch of places, actually, in the Bible. He says, I will never leave you or forsake you. We can count on him to be ready and waiting there to help us on the right path. So if you encounter a setback this week, turn back. God's waiting for you, and he will help you fix the problem. So God bless you this week. I'd like to welcome visitors. I see, let me think here. Mostly I see familiar faces. I'm less familiar with the face here in the front. Are you a regular and I just haven't caught up? Or are you visiting today? Okay, well, welcome. Come back. This is a fantastic Sabbath school, and all the other faces really look pretty familiar to me here today. The Samaans don't usually come to our Sabbath school, but understand that you're going to help with Sabbath school, and Gerry Karst, Pastor Karst, will be having our Sabbath school. Are there any prayer requests before we bow our heads or praises? Rita?
Remember the Gallimore family because Lynn passed away.
Okay, the Gallimore family. Okay, so please remember the Gallimore family. Then Gallimore passed away. And we want to remember Barbara Moore. She sends out faithfully our Sabbath school links and has been struggling a little bit. And so we miss her today, and hopefully she'll be here next week. Is apparently recovering well. All right, let's bow our heads. Father in heaven, we thank you so much for the blessings of the Sabbath day, for the rest that it provides for us. Thank you for the families that we have and the family that we enjoy here in Acceptance Sabbath School, and the support that we receive from each other. We thank you for so many blessings that you've given to us, for your word, for your promises that you will never leave us nor forsake us, that you are there when we fall away, and that you are welcoming us back, that you'll forgive us when we have setbacks. And we just want to do what's right in our lives and ask for your strength and power and your wisdom in each thing that we do, and ask for a special blessing as we study together today, that there are things that we will carry forward into the coming weeks that will enrich our relationship with you and our lives and our walk with you. And we just thank you for this time together and ask again for your special blessing. We ask for blessings on those who need special prayer. We all have some quiet requests of our hearts. We think of the Gallimore family, and we think of Barbara Moore and Benny, and just ask for your health and healing and your comfort. And so, again, thank you for the opportunities to be here. In Jesus' name, we ask and pray. Amen. All right, we'll move to our lesson study now. Thank you, Pastor Karst and Pastor Samaan, for being here today.
I'm not as tall as my friend, Elder Karst.
Good morning and welcome to the Sabbath School lesson. Yeah, you can raise mine up a little. That's good. Thank you. I'd like to introduce Dr. Philip Samaan, who's going to share the lesson with me this morning. He's a retired teacher in the religion department here at Southern. For those who are online and watching may not know him, recently retired. I first became acquainted with him when he was at the seminary at Andrews University. And I had enrolled in the Doctor of Ministry program, and I took one class called Youth Evangelism, and lo and behold, the teacher was Philip Samaan. And since then, we've been friends. He came to the General Conference shortly after that and was the editor of our Sabbath School lessons before being called here to Southern to teach here. And so I thought it would be interesting if, Dr. Samaan, you would just share briefly how this gets into the hands of the members, because we had done a survey some years ago at the General Conference, and it was determined that the Sabbath School Lesson Quarterly is the single most important publication for keeping the church together in theological unity. And so how far ahead does it begin before it gets into our hands? Who chooses the topics? What's the process by which it goes through?
Well, Elder Karst mentioned that he took a course with me in youth ministry, and that was when we were young, right?
Yes, we had more hair.
And then I believe you worked hard and you got an A in the class.
Yes,
You
I
remember
did.
that? Mhm.
That was the,
Then the other thing is this, I was his professor, he was my student. So that would seem to tell all of you that I was older.
yeah.
Right? Yes, older than you because you're my student. So I wanted to know that I was his professor and he was my student and I was a few years older. Isn't that true, by the way?
No.
No. Anyway, well, it's quite a process, by the way. The lessons you have in your hands, they go through quite a process. Like we planned 3 years ahead of time, and the editor, which was me, with a lot of prayer, chooses the authors and the topics for 3 years. That takes a lot of prayer and wisdom to know who should you ask, because you have to have the right authors. That's important.
Yes.
Even more than the topic, because you have to choose authors who believe the Bible, who believe our message. And so there are a lot of people who clamor to be authors because they want to present their own agenda. So we have to be wise to select people who will build up our people's faith in the Bible, in our message, in the spirit of prophecy. And so our people can be anchored in their faith and be able to witness with conviction about their faith. After that, the process continues for these authors to be asked, and you have to, do these people know how to write? That's important, by the way, in writing Sabbath School Quarterly, because the General Conference wanted me to have authors from different divisions. And it's interesting, the kind of manuscripts you get. I don't know if I ever showed you that, but like some authors write 4 times more than they should.
Mm-hmm.
And then you specialize in collapsing the material. And then others hardly write anything, and you have to call them. At that time, it was expensive to call overseas. Call them and tell them, could you please tell me what you're writing about? I mean, like, do you understand what you wrote? And they say, I forgot, I don't know. So you have to do your best to balance. It's really a balancing act in all aspects. And then it is sent to all the global reading committee around the world, a lot of people, for them to react to the manuscript. And we, at the General Conference, we had a local committee, mostly from that area and North America division, who look at it carefully and give their comments. And all the stuff from around the world and the General Conference local committee ends up with me. And I have to ask God to help me balance it out. All kinds of ideas, I have to balance it out, So that's part of my answer.
Okay. Who is the publisher of the
The
lesson?
General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists.
Yeah, it's the administrative committee of the General Conference.
Right.
It gives
Because,
the final seal of approval, and then it goes to the press for printing.
Right. And as you know, well, a division or two of our church, it tried to publish us in their own way. And legally, it wasn't allowed. I mean,
No.
It's not your property. Why would they do that? Because they might not agree with what's. By the way, let's remember, the Sabbath School Quarterly is not a magazine. It's not a journal for opinions, okay? This, I don't want to use the word catechism. What's a better word for it? Is to educate and anchor our people in their faith. So we're not debating doctrine. We're just trying to explain to them what our church believes.
Yeah, it's
That's
a
all.
guide. It's a guide to Bible study.
Right. That's it.
Yeah. Okay, I should have introduced his wife Geraldine earlier, but she's sitting here in the front, and we welcome you to our class. And Sherilyn is a good musician, plays the piano and the harp, and so there's always harmony in their home.
That's a good opening statement for our lesson.
Finding rest in family ties. And today's lesson surrounds the experience of Joseph from his family roots until his promotion to prime minister in Egypt. And to find rest in the family ties from which he came is almost a contradiction of terms. He left the pastures of Palestine as Potiphar's personal assistant and on to prison and then to Pharaoh's prime minister. Now, his was a dysfunctional family. His great-grandfather Abraham had more than one woman. And his grandfather Isaac showed favoritism toward his first son, Esau, causing a painful rift between Jacob and Esau that lasted more than 20 years. In his own father's household, with all the brothers that he had in his family, one father, but 4 different wives. And jealousy and strife involved the women and the various sons. And his own father favored Joseph above all the other brothers, and they hated him and sold him as a slave to Egypt. Sold him to the Ishmaelites. Dr. Samaan, who are the Ishmaelites?
Well, they're named after Ishmael. Oh, we know who Ishmael is. And so there you have blood relations. I mean, it was so dysfunctional that they're selling their own to their relatives.
Yeah, these were cousins. These were cousins. Now, he mentioned blood relatives. He's also written a book called Blood Brothers, among many other books he's written. And I recommend that you find those books, and there's a lot of good material in there. Now, sons were very important in the ancient Near East. The birthright was passed on to the eldest son. And Dr. Samaan, where did this concept in Abraham's mind and his family and so on, where do you think that kind of came from in terms of the importance of the son?
Well, Abraham and Sarah were influenced by their culture. And what was their culture? The Ur of Chaldeans,
Yeah.
Babylon. And the great lawgiver Hammurabi had a code. And the code was, because as you mentioned, children were very important, especially sons. And in that code, it states if you cannot have an heir, then you have 2 ways around that. Number 1 is to adopt the best male servant as your son. And who was his best male servant? Eliezer.
Eliezer.
Where did he find him? On his way to Canaan, right there in Damascus, Syria. Well, I was born in Syria. So he picked that wonderful servant, Eliezer, and he served him well, as you all know from the scriptures. And he said to God, please let my best male servant be my son. And God said, no, you're going to have a miracle son from you. And so that idea didn't fly. And so now Sarah was impatient. See, some people blame Sarah, but Abraham takes blame too, because he wanted his servant to be the heir. And she said to her husband, why not try another way? And she gave him Hagar. And that's, they had a son from Hagar, and they wanted Ishmael to be the promised son. I mean, he was the only son they had. He was becoming a teenager, and they got used to him. And they really believed that he was the heir. So these ideas were not just creative ideas from Abraham and Sarah. It was the culture they grew up in.
Now think of these two brothers in that family and the jealousy of the women. I mean, jealousy is very, very prominent in this story. And to have a son was such an important thing in the Middle East that you just had to have a son. Now, Jacob was fortunate, he had 12 of them. But I was in Jordan one day in the city of Amman visiting our church, and the local pastor was there, invited me to have lunch with him. And as we were talking, I noticed a number of children around, and I saw 4 of them. I said, "Oh, you have a family of 4." And they said, "Well, no, actually, we have 5. I said, "Where's the 5th one?" He said, "My brother lives in America, and they could not have children, so my wife and I had a child for him, and we gave him that son to be his own." See? I see you ladies shaking your head. How can you give up your own flesh and blood? But they did. It's part of the culture. And you have to remember that's part of what fed into Abraham and Sarah and later on in these other members of the family. It's interesting. I've been told, and I looked up online, what the Chinese symbol for trouble is. And you know what it is? 2 women under one roof. Yeah. So
why did you bring that up? But by the way, it can also cause divorce.
yeah,
And that is if a wife cannot give a child, then to them it's logical that you would leave this wife and marry somebody else who is more productive. I mean, to us in the West,
never thinking the man could be the infertile one.
yeah, that's true.
Okay, they want you closer to your mic.
Okay. I don't know why I got closer.
Well-
I guess I like you, so I got closer to you. I need to remember this here. By the way, Elder Dr. Jacobs, I think you put this too low for me. You enter, so I just pull it up like that. Okay. All right.
So actually, polygamy enters into the story of Jacob and Joseph. And let's remember the words of Jesus in Luke 16 and verse 13 that says, "No man can serve 2 masters." There's a principle there. And God's ideal has always been 1 man and 1 woman to form a household. But polygamy came in as part of the cultural milieu of the time. God did not approve it, but he permitted it and worked with it in spite of the problems it caused. Now, the word polygamy comes from the Greek word of poly, meaning many, and gamos, meaning marriage. Polygamy, many marriages. Please.
Is there still polygamy in the United States?
There probably is in some geographic areas. And sometimes people from overseas will say, "Well, you accuse us of having multiple wives in our country, but you have multiple wives in sequence. You just divorce one and marry another, divorce one and marry another." And so polygamy comes from the polygamos. And it's interesting that one of the 7 churches has the name marriage in it. You know which one?
I don't.
Pergamos, the church at Pergamos. And it was during this historical period of time of Pergamos when the church compromised and married paganism and the world and brought with it all of these pagan ideas that were not scriptural. Pergamos, interesting. Now, I want to share with you my personal experience and encounter with polygamy when I worked in the Middle East, and particularly in the country of Sudan. And Dr. Samaan and his wife spent 4 years in West Africa, so they have encountered probably similar things. But when I first went down there, we went to church on Sabbath morning, and I was with one of the missionary families. And the pastor was up front. I knew his name, and he was the pastor of the area. And they said, "You see the woman sitting over here?" I said, "Yeah." "Well, that's his first wife." "And you see the 8 children? Only 4 of them are hers. You see this other woman sitting over here by herself? That was his second wife, and 4 of those children are hers." And when this pastor first found the gospel, he was concerned about this relationship, and so the only place he knew to write to was the Voice of Prophecy, and they shared with him what the church's policy was concerning plural marriage. And being a conscientious man, he put the second wife away. But here she sat in the congregation looking at her husband, the father of her 4 children, being raised by another woman. And the missionary family said to me, "Is this what the gospel does to people?" Because in that culture, the woman who has been put away had been a wife. Nobody else will take her as a wife. And unless there's some other way of support for her, most of them end up selling themselves on the street in order to make a living. And they're saying, "Is this what the gospel does to people?" And so it was interesting. A couple of years later, we had a commission at the General Conference. I came from the Middle East and several other representatives from around Africa and parts of the world where there was plural marriage. And we met in the old seminary building in Tacoma Park for 4 days and studied this very issue, this topic. And we came to the conclusion that while it's not God's ideal, He allowed it to happen in the lives of the patriarchs, and that we came to the position that we should take a family where the gospel finds them. And if the gospel finds them with 2 women in one family, and they both accept the message, love the Lord, want to see Him soon, keep the Sabbath and all, they should be allowed to be baptized and members of the church. But the man could not hold office in the church because he's supposed to be the husband of one wife. And that he could take no additional wives in the future. And so the white paper that we produced and presented to the General Conference Executive Committee was rather a change of position, because the original position, I'll come to you, Ray Rita, the original position was developed in 1942 and said you put away any other wives and keep only the first one, and it seemed simple to those of us in North America. And what happened in 1942 at the annual council, World War II was in progress, and the overseas delegation could not get there, and this policy was voted by people who had no experience with plural marriage. Now, it was supposed to be on the agenda for the annual council in Brazil the next year. But the officers of the General Conference, knowing that Brazil was a predominantly Catholic country, felt it was not a good time to bring it up in that annual council. And so it got set aside, and it has stayed aside since. It's never been dealt with. Ray Rita, you had a comment.
When my brother was a missionary in Liberia and Nigeria, they could baptize the wives, but could not baptize the husband.
Yeah, there were many variations. And some would baptize only the first wife and not the second one. And so that's the situation. So out of this background comes the story of Joseph. And Dr. Samaan, You've written a book about some of these things too. Share with us what you gained out of the lesson. What are some of the lessons we can learn from Joseph's life and rest in the family?
Well, you mean on the Karst about his marriage? You mean Joseph's marriage, or are you talking about polygamy? So clarify to me the connection between talking about Joseph and marriage.
No, Joseph's family life obviously had an influence on him, but he's pulled out of that.
Okay.
He's now in a foreign country. How does he maintain his loyalty and keep faithful to God?
Well, I tell you, that was the most difficult experience for anybody. Beloved son, cherished by his father, comes across kind of maybe naive. He thought because his father loved him, everybody loved him. Some people have that idea. But the brothers were seething inside themselves of jealousy. Why is he so favored? Especially his mother, Rachel, was favored by Jacob. So there was this jealousy, but yet when he faced reality, harsh reality, these brothers don't appreciate me. I came to bring them supplies and food, and here they're not only thinking of rejecting me, they're thinking of killing me. What a rude awakening, put in a dry well to die, and then to be sold to the Ishmaelites. And as the hills of his homeland was disappearing in the distance, he realized he was going to be a slave, never see his family again. And right there on his journey to Egypt, on camel's back, he resolved, my only hope is the God of my fathers, and I pledged myself to be faithful and to trust. And you know, throughout the story of Joseph, it kept saying, and God was with him. God was with him. That's what sustained him. So throughout all dysfunction, family dysfunction, to have this idea, but God will never forsake me. He will never abandon me. He'll take care of me. And as he experienced the presence of God in his life, it says, God blessed everything his hand touched.
Dr. Samaan, how old would he have been at this time?
You know, I'm sure at that time he was a teenager, you know, maybe 18, something like that.
Now, I see some parallels because you left your family in Syria when you were 17 and pledged faithfulness to God and never did see them again.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. With Joseph, finally had the chance of seeing them. Why? Because he was second to Pharaoh in power and authority. But with me, I wasn't second to the president. So I couldn't make it happen.
No, but you came to a different land, a different culture, and resolved in your heart that you would be true to God.
That was the only thing that sustained me, facing all kinds of challenges.
Now talk a little bit about Pharaoh's or Joseph's temptation.
You know, it's interesting. Whenever we resolve to be faithful to God in any situation, the devil always has just the perfect attack against us. You review your life. Be careful, you know. Like this afternoon, I'm going to conduct a baptism out in nature. And I've been praying very hard all weekend. The devil would not interfere. He always, interferes. And so, and it says, by the way, it doesn't, the Bible doesn't focus much on how good people look. In the Western culture, it's very important how people look. In our Western culture, we have three gods, beauty, youth, and money. It's very important for people to look nice. And it says about Job, he must have been outstanding in his looks. It says he was handsome and very beautiful appearance, which, by the way, is not always a blessing. It's people who look beautiful usually have challenges in their lives, have problems. It's better to be like average, like us, And so Potiphar, and by the way, Joseph was trusted by Potiphar. 100% trusted with everything in the household, even his wife. Everything. He didn't pay attention to all the details. Joseph took care of it. And what happened? His wife, who had her own dysfunction, she was restless, and she wanted her life to be a bit more interesting. So she said, he is my slave. I own this guy. I own him. I can do anything with him, and he will follow me. Except she forgot that God had ownership of him way before. And so she attempted again and again. By the way, it wasn't one time. She kept at him all the time. And finally, he said, how can I commit this great sin against my God? God been faithful to me all this time, and I want to be faithful to him. And he took the risk of death. When you really stand up for what's right, you're willing to die for your beliefs. How many of us today are Seventh-day Adventists are willing to die for our beliefs? And so, and you know the rest of the story. I mean, Potiphar did not believe a word that his wife said.
Right.
And that's dysfunction. When you learn not to believe anything your spouse says, there's a problem there. But he believed Joseph. So why did he let him go to prison? You know, he could have killed him.
Yeah, he had
knowing Joseph was innocent, why did he send him to prison?
He had the authority to take his life if he wished to do so. But he didn't believe his wife, and he sent him off to prison to spare him.
Can you imagine living with such a wife? I wonder sometimes if Potiphar became a polygamist and he got a better wife. I don't know.
Interesting.
But can you imagine his best friend, Joseph, faithful servant, languishing in prison, maybe even result in his death, while he's living with his wife? I mean, that must have been hard on him.
Now, say a few words about rest in family ties. How does Joseph find rest in this situation?
Oh, the only rest he found. No other rest. In these situations, absolutely is no rest. You could be brooding over the problem. You could feel awful that you were mistreated. The only rest he had is to rest in God. To know God, wanted to have his best. God was working things out for the good. That somehow God, the good God, will bring something good out of that. And he trusted him for good. It was settled in his mind. What he started with when he came down with the Ishmaelites stayed with him all his life. And that's the reason he made this wonderful statement that should be helpful to all of us. When his brothers were afraid, as second in command in Egypt, that he could kill them. He could exact revenge. In that part of the world, revenge is very prominent.
Right.
He could have wiped them out. And so they're afraid. He said, brothers, come near. Don't worry. What you meant for evil, God meant for good. Imagine if all of us would practice that philosophy. No matter how much injustice we face, no matter how we're abused, to have this idea. I don't want to think about that. I want to think about God will bring something good out of it. Anybody who means evil for us, God can use it for the good. What an attitude. And this attitude can only result from someone who's totally committed to God and trusts him totally.
Now, it's interesting, come to you in a minute, Ray, that Joseph is one of the most intriguing stories in Scripture. It touches me every time I read it. And he is an example of Jesus Christ. I want you to think a little bit about some of the parallels we find along the way, and you can respond. Rita?
What I was going to say was that he had the example, Joseph had the example of what his father had done. His father had been married 4 times or had 4 wives. He must have taught him what was right, and Joseph had also seen what happened with his family.
In what ways do you see a parallel between Jesus and Joseph?
accused, innocent.
I didn't get that.
Falsely accused.
Okay, falsely accused while being innocent. Okay, Doug, did you have the urge to speak?
Always, but I try to refrain when someone else is teaching. When Philip said that about that statement that Joseph made to his brothers when they were afraid, there's one book that I have on preaching that suggests that is the main idea of the entire cycle of Joseph. That one verse sums up why the whole story of Joseph is in the Bible. And so I really appreciate you bringing that fact out. And I think that's how he's like Jesus, because he was the one that saved his family in a time of crisis. And there's nothing recorded in the Bible that he ever did that was wrong. The Bible records no sin of his. I'm sure he sinned, but I mean, it's not recorded there.
Yeah, and Thursday's lesson talks about the great controversy up close and personal. And you can see in Joseph's life how the devil tried to get at him in different ways. He was sold by his own brothers for 20 pieces of silver. Jesus was sold by his own disciple for 30 pieces of silver. Joseph was falsely accused and thrown in prison. Jesus was falsely accused and crucified. So there are these parallels. It's a tremendously powerful story. I interrupted you, but continue.
I was just going to say, the thought just came to my mind that Dr. Jacobs talking about Jesus. Jesus came from a very dysfunctional family. So if you come from a dysfunctional family, you're in good company. The perfect Jesus came from a dysfunctional family. Look at his brothers. He had brothers, their names are mentioned in the Bible. Mm-hmm. He also had sisters, but their names were not mentioned. He had brothers and sisters. At least we're told by inspiration that his brothers were against him. They made his life miserable. They threw obstacles in his way all the time. He didn't feel welcome in his own household. And that's why he frequented the household of Mary, Martha, and their brother. Because he felt at home. He felt he could relax to get away from his brothers who made his life miserable. Yeah. I mean, Jesus faced that. So dysfunction, especially in these last days, is prevalent everywhere. Don't be surprised at it. I mean, when I counsel my students, at some point, there's always a dysfunction. And so it's not something new. What we need to do, in spite of dysfunction, is to follow the example of Joseph. No matter what, I know God is with me, and he's blessing me, and if I trust him with all my heart, he'll bring peace, tranquility to my life. But Jesus had to do that because we live in this old, wicked world. It's not heaven yet. And this experience pervades every aspect of life, even marriage.
This is why Jesus could lay down in the boat in the middle of a storm.
Exactly.
And find rest and sleep.
Now, can I ask you a question? Because I used to be a professor, so I can ask you a question. Now, let's say something about the social skills. We talk about relationships here.
Yeah.
The social skills of Joseph. I mean, he didn't have a lot of social skills when he thought was normal for him to have this color, the shirt of many colors, beautiful colors, plus telling his brothers about his dreams. I mean, he had no skills, really. I mean, can you imagine telling your older brothers, like, look how wonderful I am, and you bowed to me?
Yeah, the whole thing.
Hated him. But he learned his lessons the hard way by facing death in that dry well, by by being sold as a slave. Finally, some people don't learn the lesson to be wise unless they go through tough times. Their life is on the line. And so here, he learns some social skills. And say something about Potiphar's household.
Well, I
Work
was
with
gonna
all the
say-
staff.
Patriarchs and Prophets mentions that God allowed Joseph to go through these experiences in order to develop his character.
Right.
And he must have quickly turned those social skills around because Potiphar trusted him completely. He must have treated everybody with respect. In the prison, it's not long until he's in charge of the prisoners.
He was in charge of the household, first of all. Now he was in charge of prison.
Yeah, I mean, who ever heard of that? You know, that he's in charge of the prison. And he found favor with all the inmates, and the two of them that had dreams, he was able to interpret the dreams, but he credited it all to God. And when Pharaoh had the dream, he said, it's not I who can tell the answer, it's God in heaven. And so Pharaoh makes him prime minister. So he has learned through this process that there's a refining process that goes on. And at any stage of the game, he was able to find rest in his God and have peace in his heart in spite of the storm going all around him. You know, so as we kind of bring down to a conclusion, God does not remove every obstacle and hardship that comes our way. He allows us to be refined in the furnace of affliction and to purify and prepare us for greater responsibility and to prepare our characters for heaven. You see, Noah, when he got into the ark and was in that storm, God did not abandon him. He went through the storm with him. Joseph was not removed from his severe trials in Egypt, but God went with him all the way. Daniel was not spared from the lion's den, but God was with him in the den. His three friends who were thrown in the fiery furnace were not abandoned because a fourth person appeared, and Nebuchadnezzar says he's like unto the Son of God, walking in the fire, and it didn't touch them. God was there. I mean, how many of us have gone into a fiery furnace? We may have fiery experiences in our lives. And John the Baptist, we wonder why he wasn't released from prison. Why didn't Jesus do something to get him out? He left him there, although his presence was with him. And when he sent his disciples to say, ask him, are you the one that was to come, or should we look for someone else? And the answer simply was, go tell him the things that you have seen and heard. And that was enough for John the Baptist, and he laid down his life at that point. And so the lesson for us is that we can find rest in the midst of these family ties that are dysfunctional. We can find rest when things aren't going right, knowing and having the confidence that God will go through the storm with us. And God, in every case, allows the affliction to come to purify our characters. Any thoughts on this conclusion?
Oh, I have many thoughts.
Yeah.
One thought, and that is we're all, every one of us, without an exception, have been mistreated at some point, experienced injustice. And we can choose to brood over it, to be obsessed with it, and make our lives miserable. We can do that. And we can feel we have the right to do that because we were abused. But remember, Jesus was there all along, facing the abuse with us. Joseph wasn't facing all that trouble by himself. God was with him, facing the same challenges. So what's the answer to that, to help us in a practical way? To know, no matter how much abused we have been, God is a God of justice. No matter how far people go in mistreating each other, in the final analysis, God, justice will prevail and everything will balance out. Just think about that. Don't fret over this. Eventually, God is going to win, and He's going to balance everything out. So vengeance belongs to God, not us. What belongs to us is trusting Him. He'll do the right thing. In the long run, nobody will get by with anything, because God will balance everything out with His grace and with His justice. And so you can relax and say, I have peace in God because He knows everything and He'll do everything right by me.
Well, I'm going to share in conclusion the words of a song, after which I'm going to ask Dr. Samaan to offer the benediction. But it's a song written by Bill Gaither. Bill and Gloria Gaither often write songs together. He does the music, she does the words. And this particular song is simply entitled Through. Just one word, through. And it says, when I saw what lay before me, I cried, Lord, what will you do? I thought He would just remove it, but He gently took me through. Without fire, there's no refining. Without pain, no relief. Without flood, there's no rescue. Without testing, no belief. Through the pain and through the glory, I will always tell the story of a God whose love and mercy will not fail to take me through.
Let's bow our heads and pray. Oh, loving Father in heaven, thank you for all these valuable lessons we learn from your word. Help us in our focus. May our focus not be the storm, but our captain, Jesus, who leads us in the storm. May our focus not be the lions, hungry lions, sometimes very hungry, but the Lion of Judah who comes down to be with us. May our focus not be the time of trouble that makes us be troubled, but may it be Jesus who leads us through the time of trouble. And the Lord, may our focus not be the fiery furnace, but the one, Jesus, your Son, who will fight fire with fire because He is a consuming fire and helps us to go through anything. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Have a good Sabbath.
Thank you very much, and really appreciated that. Next week, Dr. Klingbeil will be back with us again after traveling to Germany, Austria, and South Africa, so we'll look forward to that. But thanks to Dr. Samaan and Pastor Karst today. And we did have people watching all the way from the Philippines and from Texas and Virginia today. So we covered a lot of territory with people that were watching our Sabbath school. God bless. Have a good Sabbath.